Hello again. Now, there is still a huge pay gap between men and women in South Africa, despite legislation and company policies to combat this. According to Stats SA's Inequality Trends in SA report, women are on average earning 30% less than men doing the same job. Well, Mark Bussin from the South African Reward Association says the causes and current barriers to entry are often misunderstood. Let's find out what's his take on this, and we chat to Mark. Mark, very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for your time. So the question you're asking is, what is still driving the gender wage gap? What is it?
So thank you very much. The unacceptable gender wage gap is driven by a few things. The first one is unconscious bias. Some folk just aren't aware that they are offering less and that they are promoting less. It's also prejudice, when prejudice plays into the hands of giving bonuses, giving share schemes, thinking about promotions. And the third reason could be that when doing the interviews, women generally trust the remuneration system and say, I think you're going to be paying me fairly. And generally speaking, that's not the case. And the fourth one is poor strategies around statistical reporting and very poor understanding of statistical reporting. Let me pause there on those four main reasons why.
Okay, so let's talk about what you say is that often the reasons are misunderstood. So where exactly does this misunderstanding stem from? Is it the nature of women not to want to ask those questions, that men are a little braver, they feel a bit stronger and more empowered to ask those questions? What is it?
Yeah, so most recruiters and most HR departments would have a brief and they'd have a range, and they would obviously come in initially at the beginning or lower end of the range. And because women, generally speaking, so there are a lot of generalizations in this answer, but they tend to trust the remuneration system. They tend to trust people a bit more, whereas men would negotiate harder. They do tend to come in a bit more prepared. And it starts with the interview. It starts with the appointment. It's also in corporates where you have the managers who have the budgets. They are the ones that want to come in as low as possible. So it starts right at the recruitment process. And then once you're in the system itself, you're prejudiced against right from the get-go.
If we go back to that recruitment process, if a job is advertised, for example, would it be that when the issue of salary comes up, there's a different amount that is presented to a man and a different amount presented to a woman, or the same thing and men just are able to negotiate up?
Yeah, so normally it's a range. One would give the recruiting person or the recruiting line manager or HR person a range, anywhere, say, between 700 and 800,000. Most folks start at 700,000, and if that's where it stops, then that's where it stops. If you get pushed a bit harder, you might go up to the 800,000.
Okay, so that range, but it's not misrepresented. It's just that, I don't know, is it that men are more aware of the range, or that, how is it? And I'm battling to understand just how is it that what is it about us women that doesn't make, that stops us from actually pushing that range?
I wish I had a more definitive answer, but having done so much recruitment and interviews myself, the only thing I can conclude is that women are more trusting. They think that you're giving a fair offer. They're more trusting of the system and they're more trusting of the process.
And when we talk about the power of prejudice being one of the major underlying causes, just break that down for us. What do we mean exactly by the power of prejudice, and how is it actually implemented? How is it used in these processes?
So when you start recruiting and you have to choose between a male and a female, in the back of the recruiter or the line manager's mind sits having children, maternity leave. Some folk prefer not to come back after maternity leave, which I understand completely. And it starts right there. So there's the prejudice that the women are prejudiced against because of having children, having families.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. So let's help the women out there, Mark, this afternoon. I mean, you say you've been dealing with recruitment. Just give us some tips on questioning and negotiating, and what are the things we actually need to do when we're in that interview, or when we're having that meeting to discuss salary and just, you know, where we are as women and that job.
Yeah, thank you. So the first thing to do is to ask, what is the midpoint of that pay scale? So most recruiters, most HR folk would have a pay scale to work within. As I mentioned before, let's use the same example, 700 to 800,000. And you'd know that the midpoint is 750,000. You'd ask them for it and try and settle on the midpoint of the pay scale, number one. Number two, ask them how the bonus and share schemes work, because very often we forget to ask that question. We're only asking about the fixed pay. So once we have a better understanding of how the bonus works, then one can ask the right questions. One can exercise one's rights there. Secondly, you can ask them to have a look at the audit. Have there been gender audits? Have there been pay equity audits? And that's one thing that I think companies need to start doing, is a lot more auditing of their current situation. The government need to strengthen their law enforcement agencies. Section 30A of the Companies Act needs to be strengthened in terms of compliance and reporting of the gender gap. And I'm wondering if we don't get to a point where the penalties need to be a lot heavier for companies, and even go to naming and shaming.
I think that's absolutely very, very, very important. And thanks for those tips, Mark. And I think a lot of women not understanding that you have a right to ask, you have a right to know exactly what it is, the difference is, and speak up for yourself. Do your homework and speak up for yourself. And don't be shy to talk about money. Many of us women are actually uncomfortable talking about money.